to the Next Chapter Book Club Kids Edition by Shelley Legal. My name is Lydia Shelley, and I'm the principal of Shelley Legal, and I'm so happy that you could join us. The Next Chapter Book Club Kids Edition will look at several children's books that parents can read to their children to help them create their own family divorce story. Divorce is the most important story that parents will tell their children when families experience separation. What parents say, when they say it, and how they say it will impact on children's mental health, their relationships with themselves and their parents. Children are impacted by their parents' separation, even when the separation is amicable. Little people often experience big emotions. It is very common for children to experience anger, shame, loneliness, guilt, and grief when their parents separate. In this episode, we are speaking to Laurie Brown, artist and the co-author of Dinosaurs Divorce, a guide for changing families. And this was first published in 1986. Since then, over 1.5 million copies of the book have been sold. This book explains the process of divorce, the role that lawyers may play in family law proceedings, and it puts a name to the emotions that children may experience when their families separate. It also touches on several complex issues that arise in a child's world when their parents separate. Issues such as where a child may live, the reality when children need to leave their primary residence to spend time with the other parent, celebrating holidays, blended families, just to name a few. Hello, and this was first published around 20 years ago, is that right?
1986. 1986. Isn't that incredible?
I was one.
I wasn't. It's a long time. This book has held its own. It's really gratifying.
It's amazing because I know that it's used a lot throughout hospitals. It's used a lot for the divorce and family law section in America, all across the world, when people need to explain to children really complex issues, for example, what it's like to physically leave one of their parents' presence or their primary residence. What gave birth to the idea of this book?
It wasn't my idea. It was Mark Brown's. He had gone through a divorce. He had these two young boys, and he had been looking in the library for books he could read with them so that it would make it easier to talk to them. He didn't find any books he liked. So when we got together and then eventually married, he said, we had already done one book together, and he knew my background in child development and education. He said, Laurie, you need to write this book. And I totally resisted. It's a tough subject. It's a little sad sometimes. I wasn't looking for that kind of project, but I did do my homework. I did research what was out there, and then I agreed with him. And then I could see a place for another book. So that's what happened.
Because of Mark, and you have a background though in educational psychology. Is that right?
Yeah. I have a bachelor's in child development and family relationships is what it was called, and a master's in educational psychology. And I actually have a doctorate in human development from Harvard.
Oh my God.
So academically, I have the training,
You have more than enough training by the sounds of it. And that's obviously, you can see that in the book as well, the way that you're able to write about really complex issues that adults, quite frankly, struggle with themselves. You've managed to explain these really complex issues in a really child-focused and friendly way. So hats off to you. It's fantastic. No wonder it's sold more than 1.5 million copies since 1986.
Well, it's also because my parents, it's not just academic training, it's personal experience. My parents divorced, so I was one of those children when I was maybe, let's say, 11 or so. And I divorced. I married really young, and we broke up. So I experienced divorce as a young adult. And then Mark I married after he divorced, so I became a stepmom. So I have the perspective of all those divorce experiences. And without that, the book wouldn't have been the way it is, for
Well,
sure.
the issue when we come to kids' books and divorce is that divorce is one of the biggest stories. That story about divorce, why it happened, and what will remain constant in a child's life. This is the most important story that separated parents can tell their children, because the story of divorce and the child's understanding of it can have a huge impact on their mental health, their relationships with other parents, with other caregivers, really their relationship and how they view the world. So have you noticed just the impact that your book has had? Have you had feedback in regards to, for example, parents using it as a way to talk to their children?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty thrilling to get a letter in the mail, sometimes from a child or a teenager,
Oh, wow.
sometimes from an adult. Over the years, it has certainly, proven itself. I think part of the reason that it's hopeful is my text, my words try to be very straight with kids, try to tell them something true and something relevant. But Mark Brown, the illustrator, is showing them dinosaurs, not kids. And we did that on purpose because it's true in many other subjects that removing it from human, making it a little fantastic, gives everybody a little space, So we're talking not about you and your brother or your sister, we're talking about the dinosaur. And so it just gives the opportunity for your feelings to be expressed maybe a little indirectly at first, they're the vehicle. And so I think that's one reason that over the years, it has been helpful.
And the illustrations are just gorgeous. So I'm holding it up here, but they're just divine. And they're timeless. And
Yeah.
what kids love dinosaurs as well.
Yeah, there is that interest. There really is. And I mean, we've used it successfully to talk about other tough subjects. So I know. And here's another thing, because we just published a new book about democracy.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Really relevant.
yeah, Democracy for Dinosaurs. And it was originally toyed with the idea that we would use human kids in that book. As soon as you start using humans, what happens on every page, think about it, is you want to be inclusive, right? You don't want to leave out disabled kids. You don't want to leave out kids with different colored skin. You don't want gender to be a big issue. And as soon as they're human, you start counting on every page to make sure, that everyone's in there. With dinosaurs, they're green. I mean, that solves the color problem right away. Here in America, that's still, something we struggle with. So, it
In Australia.
has a lot of virtue. Yeah. And there's humor, so I can be serious and the illustrations can give you a little chance to laugh. And it's a good combination.
What do you think it is about adults being incredibly nervous about approaching these really difficult subjects with their children? So whether it be about democracy or race issues or things like divorce and separation, what is that hesitation you think that parents may have? Do you think it's because we're worried we're going to get it wrong?
That's a great question. I mean, I bet different parents have different issues with it. And of course, they're struggling too often. It's a time of change. So you might, as an adult, might not feel you're most confident and you don't want to hurt your children. There's always that. But I mean, there are things that make it clear that beating around the bush and not having those conversations and not letting kids have a safe place to just have their feelings and be able to share them, that's troublesome. It's troublesome for the parents. They need to be able to do that too. But certainly they're kids. I mean, maybe mostly parents are trying to protect their children. Don't you? Maybe, do you think?
I think so. I just think also there's a certain danger, or it's problematic in the absence of a story or absence of an explanation as to what is happening in a child's life.
Yeah.
That they'll fill their own little heads with justification, the reasons as to why something's happened. Why has mum left? Why has dad left? Wasn't my fault. So I think that's why it's so useful for, at least from my perspective, to have a really direct yet child-focused book that explains these subjects, because it's factual, but it doesn't leave any room for their worries or their insecurities to feed into what they may perceive to be their parents' divorce story.
Well, it's like, I think the second sentence in the book is, "It's not your fault." I forget exactly the wording, right? Because that's a common problem. Kids worry that it's because of them, and that's the last thing they need to feel guilty about. I mean, that's a heavy load.
It's a heavy burden that kids don't need to carry.
Probably isn't true. Yeah.
The sentence is, "You are not to blame if your parents get divorced."
Yeah. I mean,
And
it could be said many times, don't you think?
that's
You
right. I
know,
was say
is
it's
there
something.
anything? Yeah.
Yes, and they probably need to be told that a number of times
Yeah, I
throughout
think so.
the first 12 months, and they're on in, really.
So, right.
And what do you think is the magic? I call it the magic of the parents' lap or the caregiver's lap. What do you think is so attractive for kids to have their parents read them stories, whether it's Dinosaur Divorce or any other book? What do you think is the magic that's in that? Because my 10-year-old still asks me to read to him.
Yeah, which is so great. You want that to continue. In fact, I wonder, doesn't it seem a shame that we adults don't keep doing that so much with each other, our partners, or, because, it's physical, right? It's that closeness. And reading a story from a book instead of, say, hearing it an audio book, or seeing it on television with animation or illustrations. The thing about the one-on-one is that it's paced. It's an interaction, right? And so you know who you're reading to, and you sense what interests them, what doesn't. You might speed up, you might slow down, you might pause, you might ask a question, they might ask a question. It has this fluidity, I think. It's a really good question.
That's a good point to make, actually, how you can essentially tailor the reading or the storytelling that's involved with a book to your child. And if you have two in the same house, it's different.
Yeah, I think it's interactive in the most intimate way.
And do you think that have you seen, as an author, have you seen that change amongst families, whether they have, for example, the time to dedicate to reading a story, or the ability of a kid to concentrate and sit down for that long to listen to a story? Have you seen any changes as an author with respect to family storytelling in the last 20 years?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure there are people studying that. And if I was still at Harvard, I'd be studying it, frankly. But I'd be guessing. There is this concern that you put a very young child in front of an iPad and something else is happening. I mean, you can just speculate, right? That it's not the same. It's different. So you want to be mindful. I mean, and be careful about taking advantage of what that has to offer, but not giving up something else that was special because of its own qualities, right? Each way you tell kids a story has certain weaknesses and certain strengths. And want to be a little thoughtful about that. And there, I don't think there's a substitute. I mean, I guess I'm biased. I there's a substitute for being close to your child with a book. I mean,
that that you're
it
talking.
is magical, you know. It is, yeah, for sure.
And your book, one of the other subjects that I love that you've written about is not only explaining the family law process. For example, if parents are in court, what does that mean and how that would impact on the child's little life? But what I love is that you've got a little section here about living with step parents, and it just sets out so beautifully the different roles that step parents may play in a blended family.
Yeah.
So in Australia, like the US, step parents and blended families are just, becoming much more common. When you wrote the book 20 years ago, was that inclusion in the book controversial at all, or was it just part of mainstream American?
Already, yeah, it was pretty common. Other things we've written about maybe were more controversial, but no, I think it was pretty acceptable and helpful, maybe. And I saw you wrote to me and you said it was a small percentage. I thought it was under 4%, right? In Australia?
That's the statistics, but it's the fastest growing family unit, if you like, in Australia.
Really?
Yeah.
I bet it's much higher in the States, because I think I remember hearing that one out of three marriages might end in divorce. I mean, it was a huge number. It was shocking, actually. So out of that, there might be a lot of remarriages for sure.
And do you think, just from your own view, like step parenting must be a very difficult job? I'm not a step parent. I find parenting two boys hard enough. I can't imagine what it's like to parent children that you're not, there's no blood relationship there, but it's just defined by love. But how do you see a role for books? A role for books to play in explaining to a child that new relationship that they may have with a step parent?
Well, like we were saying, I don't think it's any different. It's a great vehicle for a step parent to use a book to talk about each other, and not necessarily you're doing it through the book. You can talk about the characters, but in fact, you might be projecting onto them how you feel. I mean, what's wrong with that? It just takes a little of the strain away. I mean, I am a step parent still, and it was not easy because they already had a mother. What do they need another mother for? It's kind of a pain in the neck. And so it took a lot of time and patience for us to come to see that we really could get along and love each other. We didn't snap our fingers. The reason they liked me at first was because they liked my car.
Oh, really?
And I could give them rides. I had this great VW Beetle convertible, and they could sit in the back and the breeze would flow by them, and they thought that was pretty cool. But me, they could pretty much do without for a while.
Oh, wow.
And then all the standards are different, the rules in different households, as I mentioned in the book. I mean, it's complex and it takes some doing. I just said it's doable, but every family has its own dynamics, and you're going to have to put some effort into it.
Can I ask a personal question? When you stepped into that role of being a step parent, did you have much support around you, or were step parents reflected back to you in other books that were around at the time? Was it visible?
No, I don't remember learning. Maybe I did try to read. I think now that you mention it, I did look for a little guidance, and there were a couple of books like How to Be a Step Parent, something like that.
I wonder if there is
how to be my library upstairs, and it's helpful. But you just have to use your best maturity, right? And if you know something about kids, that's helpful. And these kids in particular, I mean, it's a bit of a dance, right? And you're the one entering the family.
That's
they're already family.
Yeah, that's a really
So
good.
yeah, you're the newcomer, and sometimes that makes you the heavy. And if people are upset, you might be the target, even if they're not really so mad at you, but you're the weakest link. I mean,
Mm.
it's all complicated, but I can say with some confidence that we all really love each other now. It just took a while in our case.
I think it's important for everyone to be patient, because it's a huge amount, uh, uh, such a huge amount of change for a child when their parents separate, and it must be, when you think about it, an enormous new world to navigate that they don't really
Yeah,
have a point for.
yeah, and it's not under their control.
Mm.
Right. The thing that I mean, most kids want their parents to be happy and together. Most kids don't want this to happen.
And what I love about your book as well is that it also touches on this topic of grief, and the feeling, it gives the name of the feeling that kids might be experiencing but not know what it is that
Yeah,
grief,
yeah,
their family is going to change or has changed. It's the grief that their parents, and that hope that all kids have, that their parents will get back together and everything will be fine again, and understanding the finality of what divorce means for a family.
yeah. Well,
And I
don't they say with grief, or dealing with difficult emotions, the first thing is to name it? Isn't that sort of that's something people say in psychology, you have to identify it before you can cope with it. So yeah, so Mark did those dinosaurs with all those different expressions. There's one, it's called Relieved. Did you see that? The
I
one
did. I'm
that said,
trying to page so I can hold it up.
all right.
So it talks about when they hope that their parents also get back together, and it's got this.
Oh, yeah. No,
But we'll.
that's from earlier on. Look at the very beginning. And there's a page spread of all their faces with their different expressions of
Yes.
emotion. That one. Yeah, that one, which is kind of crazy, isn't it? Well, do you, I mean, and those are they all seem legitimate, don't they? That inclusion of the word relieved is one that you wouldn't normally see, I think, relieved. And the reason I put that, this is personal, the reason I put relieved is because I've experienced it anyway. It can happen that there's so much conflict in a family, and the parents can be so unhappy that actually there is a sense of relief when they separate because there's peace. I mean, it really runs the gamut.
Yeah, it really does, and especially, you're quite right. If a parent child relationship they've experienced family violence or whatnot in the home, a lot of kids, from what I'm told by child psychologists and whatnot, exactly, they do feel relieved, and
Yeah,
they can then start thinking in terms of their own security as well, with support, of course.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
think a really important aspect for kids to understand is that that's also allowed. You're allowed to feel relieved as well, and there's no
Yeah,
shame
because you
involved.
might think you shouldn't feel that way, right? You might think that wasn't a good thing. So parents really just hopefully can leave some room for their kids, give themselves some space, but also their kids.
What I've noticed is that we've become much better, I think, as lawyers, as recognizing when our clients need support, or how we can assist them holistically. So they might have a legal problem, but we would also
Yeah,
talk to them, for want of a better word, and I kind of cringe when I say this, but that self-care aspect of the
yeah,
human that we're
yeah,
talking to. I'm not talking to a legal problem. I'm talking to a human. But what
that's
I'm
right.
that there's a big gap between, for example, providing support to parents on how to best support their children when they're going through that litigation period, or when they're going through that process of separation. It's just really interesting culturally to see the shift that's happening within the legal community here. I might
Yeah,
be asking you outside what your experiences are over
yeah.
in the US, But have you noticed anything similar with respect to a cultural shift on how things are spoken about when we come to divorce and separation for children?
I couldn't really speak about it legally. It's true. I'm not sort of following it. I can't imagine that I mean, it has become so commonplace that probably maybe that's making it a little easier. I don't know. But there is one thing I in our previous communication that I thought about a little bit when you're thinking about um, things for parents going through this to remember to do with their kids. Um, there are a couple of things that come to my mind. One is, especially when you're in the midst of this and your own feelings as an adult and a parent, your own feelings are intense, is to try not to project the feelings you have for your partner onto your kids.
Mm.
You may be angry with whomever, your husband, your wife, your partner, but it's really not helpful for you to pass that anger on to your kids, because your kids would prefer to love both parents if they can, and if they have anger, that's for them to deal with their parent. But it could really backfire, in the long run. It's not helpful to do that. And you might not even realize that you sort of are trying to get your kid to be your ally, but it's not fair. And
That's
another,
perfect
right,
advice or perfect insight that you've.
but relatedly is your kids are still your kids, even though they may be wise and smart and savvy and know you. It's
Yes.
really also not fair to make them your confidant, because they're not your peers. You need a friend for that, or a sibling, or a counselor, or a lawyer, as you say. On the other hand, it's important to sort of remember that you want to be honest. You don't want to lie to your kids, because they'll know, for one thing.
They're very
Um,
good at they're very good at figuring it out. That's right.
yeah, they're really intuitive. They watch their parents. I mean, so you have to sort of find this balance between telling them what's going on, honestly, what they need to know, but not going further than they need to know, and sharing things that are really not their business. It's between you and the partner that you're separating from. So I think those are things I thought of when we were speaking before. And I think that's something I have to offer anyway.
That's perfect insights, because we often talk about with our clients or with people who are going through this process of separation, is that your children are half your ex-partner. They're half of
Yeah,
you. So if you denigrate or say bad things about your partner in the presence of the children, you're actually
yeah,
harming children in a roundabout way. And
yeah. It's great that you tell them that. Wow, that's terrific.
yeah, well, we have to, because I feel like we're obligated to, because at the end of the day, lawyers are not going to be in your life forever, and they shouldn't be. No one
Right.
likes court. It's not a very pleasant experience sometimes.
Mm,
The problem is that when lawyers step out, and if parties have been in litigation for 2 or 3 years,
mm,
how are they meant to co-parent? It's very difficult if a matter's been run in such a way that it's just blown apart what little threads of co-parenting relationship were there. And in the end, it's the children who suffer, right? If parents can't communicate properly, if they can't co-parent effectively, it's the children, it's the kids that are going to get affected.
mhm,
So
mhm.
yeah, that's why we do it anyway.
Well, it sounds like you're doing more than the job you were hired for. That's really wonderful. No, really.
Thank you. What I'd like to ask you about is your own childhood, in the sense that you're an amazing creative artist. I've printed out some of your art here that I'm looking at.
Yeah,
In 2000 as well, in the year 2000, you were actually offered a contract, is that right, to complete 2 further children's books, but you actually turned it down.
right. I did.
And
Yeah. Mm.
Is that because you wanted to focus more so on your creative pursuits with respect to being a fine artist?
Mhm. Yeah, I had just written and illustrated a book. It's the only time I illustrated as well as wrote a book. And it was called The Vegetable Show. And it was a terrific experience. And and also other experiences that I had sort of kept leading me in the direction of fine art. It was always, I think it was always maybe hiding in the wings, and other academic work or professional work had kind of been there, and it was good too. But this was sort of under the covers or something, or in the wings in the theater. And the contract to do 2 more books with Little Brown and Company was very lovely. Writing for children is wonderful work. However, I had just illustrated this book, so I knew that I could do that. And when you illustrate a book, as great as it is, um, there are a lot of rules that have to be followed. So, for example, if you have a character in the book, it has to look recognizable on every page. There has to be the right amount of room for text and illustration. There has to be, there's all kinds of restrictions as well as freedom. So I had that experience, but I thought, wow, what could I do without those restrictions if I was just free to do art? And the reason I didn't sign the contract was because I thought I would feel regret, in life. Um,
Wow.
want to try the things that you feel you might be really passionate about. You don't want to keep pushing them aside because you might regret that you never did them. So I jumped. I felt like I jumped off a cliff, honestly. No one was telling me to do fine art. I could maybe not even do it. It could be a disaster, but I just did it. And, I'm not sorry at all. I've never been, it's fine. It's going well. And I'm glad I'm doing it. And when a good subject, an important subject comes up, I see that I can detour and write a book for children too. So, you know, um, but it was just the sense of not now or yeah, maybe sort of now or never, how long am I going to wait?
Wow. And so was your creativity, but how was that fostered in your home as a child?
Not so much. I'm not sure really where that I've thought, people always say, like you
How
see
did
young children and they've been drawing or playing the violin since they were 4. I don't think I was that person.
Wow.
Um, my aunt, I think, was probably the most artistic. My mother's sister, she made her own clothes. She, sat at the sewing machine. She could go to the window of Lord and Taylor department store, apparently, look at a suit, go home, make a pattern, and make the suit because she
Wow.
couldn't probably. So, maybe there was something there, some little in my genes. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know. Nobody discouraged me from being creative, but no one said, "Oh, Laurie, that's for you." I don't know. It just happened, fortunately.
Wow. That's And is the creative process that you engage in with your art, is it similar, or are there similarities at all with respect to when you write a children's book, or is it something completely different?
Well, writing, I don't want to say it's easier, but what's different is the medium itself. So writing is this code of language we all agree on, and we have to choose our words and our grammar and find what we want to say. With art, it's more, the word I learned is replete. In art, there's no one code, is there? It could be almost now, contemporary art, it could really literally be almost anything, right? There are almost no rules. In fact, the more rules you break, maybe the better. I don't know. So I think art just opens the thing up even wider. The blank page is even perhaps more inspiring or more terrifying, I don't know. When you're writing, at least you have a language. So I feel like I started with the writing because it seemed a little more familiar and a little less scary. I knew I wanted to make things for children, not just study children. So, but I think I edged my way up by starting with writing because I had already written, I wrote reports, I wrote lots of things, I think I just crept my way.
You just reminded me of the first time as a young girl that I learned about, and I'm going to pronounce his name wrong because I'm Australian, but the first time I learned about the artist Marcel Duchamp and his ready-made series, where he literally had the bicycle wheel and stuck it on the little stool. And I remember seeing that art for the first time in an art gallery in the flesh, other than in the book, and my heart, it was such a strange physical reaction, but my heart started beating 100 miles an hour, and I just was staring at it. I just couldn't believe that it was right there, and I'd just seen it in a book. But that, when we talk about the different languages that are involved as both, it's just, for me, really interesting, the language and the audience, that relationship with the audience and how that can change depending on who the viewer is, where you are, it's just, but that's just clicked in my mind. It just, that's the moment for me, kind of made sense.
Were you thrilled to see it in the flesh?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It was thrilling. I fell into, this sounds really bizarre, but in a way I kind of fell in love. It was really so strange. I don't know what other word I use to explain it, but for me, that, and it was just, I don't know what it was, but I just, that feeling, and I was in absolute awe. And I think sometimes we come across a piece of artwork or a book, or we just get that feeling, that emotional connection, and that's what's so beautiful about art, right? It's audience.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, I've just showed myself to be a big nerd then, but anyway. The last question that I have for you is that when you were a little girl, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I knew what I didn't want to be. My mother said, because that's how it was then, be a secretary or be a teacher. My mother became a teacher. And I think that was the advice you got, so that they would know you would get a job and have your own money and manage and that sort of thing.
Independent.
And I remember thinking, I don't think it's going to be either one of those, actually.
Oh, wow.
I don't think I knew. But I've been really lucky to have really great jobs. I just have been very fortunate, and I'm not finished with them either. So I'm going to have my first solo exhibition in an art museum next summer here in New York, in upstate New York. So that's exciting. Yeah. I don't think, one thing leads to another. I mean, some kids do, they're 8 years old, they say, I want to be an architect, and they become an architect, which is even more incredible. I don't think, I mean, I'd love to say that was me, but I don't think it was,
Want to be.
There was a time I thought I might play piano, because I did play piano, classical piano, and my teacher, who I adored, I don't know if we'd ever talked about it or not, but it was in the back of my mind. Maybe I was good enough, maybe. And one day we were having a lesson, and I was already in high school. And I remember her saying to me, it was kind of a little sad. She said, Laurie, don't do that. Don't try to go down that road, because it's so hard. And this is a woman who hadn't married. I think she must have been in her 30s, which to me seemed very old at the time. I had seen her perform at Carnegie Recital Hall, which was amazing, once you've done that. So I just thought the world of her. But I thought, she's giving you good advice, because she looks a little sad. She lives alone. She has these students come, but what is her life really? And I thought that's probably good advice. So, I mean, I think I've learned more from like what I didn't want, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I've
unfortunately.
just kind of taken opportunities as time has gone by, things have become clearer to me, or I've been invited to do something and I want to do that. I mean, for example, I was in New York and I was working, and I had my master's, but I was interested in children's television. And I thought, because I knew that it was very powerful, that it could be better than it was. And I thought about that. And all of a sudden, there was a brand new graduate program at Harvard, at the education school, that was called the Center for Research in Children's Television. And what they were doing was amazing. They were helping Sesame Street, they were helping Children's Television Workshop learn what kids were actually getting from their show. So with Harvard, with the people working there, and the producers and the director and all those people, even the people who ran the Muppets, who were the puppeteers, they would come up to Harvard and we would work together so that there could be research, so they would actually be able to improve the show and accomplish their goals, because they wanted to educate kids. And I found out about that program, and see, that's something I really wanted. I thought I would do my doctorate and then I would go right back to New York and I would get the job of director of children's programming, and I would really turn things around. And the reason I think I didn't actually do that or try is because I learned that television is a corporation. It's not a little book, it's not a piece of art you go home and you make. No, well, a book you need a publisher usually, but it's a corporate effort, and there are a whole lot of people, and there's going to be politics, and it's going to be complicated, and it probably isn't the right job for me. So, you investigate, and it was great. It was a great program. I loved it. But in the end, that job just sort of fell away. So, you live and learn, right?
Well, I know I said that that was my last question, but you raised earlier in the interview this new book that you're working on about democracy, and that I would love to, if you could tell me more about that. I think it's
Well,
so
if you give me, maybe it's on your email. Give me your address and I'll send it to you. It's done.
Oh, it's done.
It
Perfect.
was published in September.
Oh,
I'll
wow.
send, just make sure I have your mailing address, okay? I'll
I'd
send
love
you a copy.
you. Oh, that's wonderful.
It's
And
because of what's been going on in our country, and the worry that our democracy was becoming weak and damaged and compromised. And nobody, when I was a girl, nobody sort of instilled that in me. We were political in that we voted, my parents and so on, but um, I don't think I realized. I think I took, even though I've, been involved in marches or very few things, yeah, I've helped a little. I don't think I think I took our government, the democracy, for granted. And I now see that that is mistaken. In fact, it's the opposite. You cannot have democracy without an informed, moral citizenry. It isn't going to prevail. It isn't going to survive, and it isn't going to thrive. And so that's what drew me to write that book, because I'm not going to go to every march, and I'm not going to be a fundraiser. Those aren't the things I'm that good at. But I thought, well, I know something about writing and something about kids, and I have something to say. So I'll send it to you.
and has that been well received in the US, that book?
Well, it's just out. So it's gotten some good reviews and it's selling pretty well. We've done a few online presentations. We just did something we're going to do something with the Metropolitan Museum of Art for some reason. And we've done a presentation. I think there's something on YouTube. If you look up the American Folk Art Museum, they did a presentation with us. And we did a book launch with a children's bookstore here in New York called Books of Wonder. But, you know, having the pandemic is not making it any easier.
Mm.
So we'll see, you know, I mean, our editor, who's wonderful, at Little Brown, she said, judging from the other dinosaur books like Dinosaurs Divorce, which has been in print for so very long, she said, when we gave you the contract, it wasn't because we expected it to just explode before the election. This is a book that's going to have a long life. That's what they're imagining. So good. Democracy, you know, we need to raise children to understand and care, right? You have a democracy too, right?
We do, and we have compulsory voting. So a lot of we have compulsory voting, and if you, in some circumstances, be fined if you don't vote. But in saying that, I personally, I sit on a few different civil liberty organisations here, and I don't think we teach it very well, if at all. But what I'm seeing in a lot of the young people now is this understanding that the issues that affect them, we're all linked with respect to the struggles or the problems, the social problems that just affect people differently. And there's a huge, much like the US, I imagine, there's a huge push now for things like white privilege to be better understood, and how we like to think in Australia that we don't have class systems here, but we absolutely do. We just don't like talking about it. But I'm finding a lot of young people are across it so much better than what I was at their age. And
we have that too. It's pretty hopeful, isn't it? Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah, I know. Well, I'll happily mail it to you, and then you can tell me what you think, okay?
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. I really appreciate it. And, you know, just please keep writing books. We need it.
Thank you. And because of you, Little Brown we're going to amend our contract so that now the publisher, the big publisher, the owner of Little Brown is Hachette, it's French. They have Hachette Australia. So in time, they can sell the book, the divorce book and the democracy book and a couple of the others. You might be seeing them. So great.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. You pointing it out.
Well, look, I'm really looking forward to the democracy book as well, because I think we need very much a book like that here as well. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for liking the divorce book. I appreciate it, Lydia. Thank you.
My regards to Mark as well.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.